So I just today met with about 75 school leaders, and a lot of what we were talking about is just how are we going to start the year? What's the big message? What was for you sort of the mantra, the big rallying cry that you gave your teachers?
Well, the first thing, I always try to start off with a theme. My theme this year was the time is now. Your commitment to your students, the Killian students. And we always tie it into with a book. And that book talked about change, learning something new or sail to the ocean. It's a book about, trying something totally new. And it's okay if you step off. And one part of it is if, hey, I'm learning to ride a horse because you've never ridden a horse before.
Yeah.
Or a person learning how to swim. That first time you take that dive into the water, what is the expectation? What's going to happen?
Yeah.
So, that's how we started the year, because I use an analogy, that I use my teacher. I think I heard you say before. It was, if you had a child that was in first grade and you take a year and a half, some kids have never ever stepped inside of a school building. So we have to now think to allow parents to be back in the building.
Yeah.
How do we do that as a school system?
Yeah.
And so, after we had our days of professional development, new staff introductions and teacher preparation, we had like a little mini conference style right within our building.
Yeah.
But it was 6 people, 6 people, 6 people, 6 people, 6 people, all the way around a rotating schedule. And it worked phenomenally well. Phenomenal.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I think it's so beautiful the way you're talking about yourself, your leadership as you're the keeper of the values. Your job is to, raise the standard high, raise that flag high, and to call to your people right this way. And what the decision you made is to call your people to be an organization, a learning organization, an organization that embraces change. And it's interesting because, there's different themes that somebody could, you could come at this from a variety of ways. But I think that decision to embrace that we're a learning community, that together we're taking risks. And Stacey, the thing that I'm just reminded of, and you sort of were hinting at it, is we've never had a time like this. Like in the history of all of our lives,
Never.
There's never been a moment where we are really redefining school. We're redefining what we are together. We're redefining what we want for our kids. It's like, we're starting over in a way that we've never had that moment. So it is so huge for school leaders, but also if you think of a teacher as the leader of their class, the way you lead your community, they need to lead their community, right?
Well, when I started the journey here at Killian Elementary School, Killian Elementary STEAM Leaders Magnet in Richland School District of Columbia, 5 years ago. You're that first year principal, you're trying to figure out, okay, what I'm going to do, how I'm going to go and about doing it. And it was my first principalship. I knew I can handle the task. And so first year, just observations, fast forward through that year because it went by fast. Then that summer, we started to put a plan in place. How are we going to get students engaged in the work? How are we going to get student achievement up? Because I had already studied the test data already.
Yeah.
And, of course, test data was relatively not where incoming principal would want it. So I had to look at the areas of literacy and math.
Yeah.
And so we started that journey back in 2000, I think it was 2007, 2018. And I had to figure out, how will I engage teachers in writing? Well, I started that October, and I think the contact was Kathy Neville. And when I started emailing her, I said, I had some funding from the State Department because we're a Title I school. I said, let me figure out the scope and sequence of the funds first. And once I figured out I can use it school-wide, I said, that's what I want to do. So what I did, I said, hey, let me start. I think I started that October. We would
email your second year as a school leader. Yeah.
October. I started at October, and I said, Stacey, keep emailing her once a week. And finally she said, not yet. We have not, found out what we're going to do with schools. That'll happen in January. So of course, over the break, I emailed her coming back from the break, and
You were
she was
persistent.
honestly, she was phenomenal. Very phenomenal. And she said, well, this is what it would cost. And so I had to understand the structure of how the PD would be delivered. And she said, so many participants. I said, well, this is what I'm thinking. K2, 3, 5. And I said, well, can we do 2 days? She said, well, it had to be a 4-day institute. I said, that's fine. And so I knew I had the funds there.
Yeah.
And honestly, I had to figure out, how do I get teacher buy-in?
Yeah.
So then I said, well, we have work days. So on the work days, what we did, we actually, I said, well, I can give them 4 days back in the classroom when we come back in that following year.
Yeah.
And give them renewal credits, set it up like the district has set up PD.
Yeah.
And then all the pieces came in place. The district had heard that, Killian brought the institute to their school. I said yes, and we had 2 phenomenal trainers. And I went back and I found them. It was Jonathan and Arlene.
Yeah,
They made a strong connection with this staff.
Yeah.
And those 4 days, I think the first day I had back end of the year in service. So I wrapped that up and I came over to the school. I got permission to leave early because I wanted to engage in the work with the teachers.
Yeah.
And honestly, we were in the media center and we had another group somewhere. And honestly, this was now in Richland too. See, we got out of school that week before, that Friday.
Right. So teachers were tired.
Yeah, but I said, you know what? Put some more PD on them because they'll be fine. They're still in that mode.
Yeah.
And honestly, it worked out well, but I had to honor my commitment when we came back to school. I could not touch them for 4 days. They had 4 work days in their classroom. And of course, they loved it.
Yeah.
But just the engaging piece, when it came to writing, because in Richmond too, in our district, they automatically said, Stacy, make sure it's writing units of study. I said, because we didn't adopt that other part of the curriculum. I said, that's understandable.
Yeah.
And so that's how we started our journey. Because it's my belief as a principal and even as a teacher. How do you get kids to read? You have to get them to write, to talk about the experiences.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because when I was working yesterday, I worked with new teachers. And one of the big messages I said to them is, you're going to have to think carefully about what matters most. And I think coming from this pandemic, we're all asking that question. I mean, there's a way in which we have faced death, all of us, and we're all like more aware that every minute of our time is precious. Every minute of our children's time is precious. And I said, you have to think about what matters most. And I do think that right now, coming back in September, that one of the most beautiful things people can do is to form a writing community and to really let people, we have such stories to tell, all of us, and we need to bring those stories out, and we need to see that we can take the hard stuff of our lives and we can, find meaning in it and find majesty and beauty and life lessons in what we've lived through. So I think that never has writing been more important. My dad died. My husband and my dad both died in the last year. So it was a little rough for me. But when Dad died, I have 8 brothers and sisters. And we talked about, okay, who this was right before the pandemic. Like, we had a service for him in February. And, when the pandemic started, it was like end of February or March, but we got the service in. But my brothers and sisters were talking about, well, who's going to speak, at Dad's service? And we decided that all 9 of us were going to each have 3 minutes, just 3 minutes. And to look back over my dad's life and to find like 1 or 2 stories, really small moments that represented him. And then to have a chance to just share them with this enormous congregation. Throughout this year, it's almost like I held on to those stories. It was almost a way for me to hold on to my dad. I think when we tell stories of the people that we love or of the things we've been through, it's just a way of holding it close. I guess I'm going to tell you the story. One of the stories I told of Dad. I remember when I was in about 7th grade, I was waiting for a phone call from some boy, and I was sort of pacing around. Will the phone ring? Will the phone ring? And then I saw my dad come in the back door, and he was all covered with snow. It's Buffalo, and he stomps off the snow. And my
Uh,
mom's like, says to him, "Where have you been?" And I'm sort of in the other room, kind of listening in. And he says in one of those stage whispers my dad always used to do, where he would whisper it, everybody would hear it. He says, "I went down to Miller's Pharmacy to make a phone call." And my mom's like, "Why did you go to the drugstore to make a phone call?" And he's like, "Lucas is waiting for a phone call. I didn't want to occupy the phone." And here it is, 60 years later. And I think about my dad and I think, what do I have to thank him for? And I'm like, "Dad, thank you for that phone call from Miller's Pharmacy. Thank you for." And I think the act of choosing moments of your life that matter and then putting them on the page is a way of, it's a little like what you did when you had to say you're bringing your staff back. What are you going to do first is really like values clarification. What do you cherish? What do you honor? What's first for you? And I think for kids and for teachers, as we come back this fall, to have times to just pause and say, okay, what did I live through?
yeah, I
What are
mean,
the stories I have to tell?
it's a very important time in history.
Yeah,
And, like I tell my own kid, he's 7 and he's living through a pandemic,
yeah,
but this is what something I think would be engaging for them to write about because school closure, what did you do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or just that day?
yeah,
When
yeah,
the world just shut down, people had masks on. I think, it's a great time because we can capitalize from so much from kids and learning, but I do think, and it's just a fundamental belief of mine, I use the analogy, it's like driving a car when um, you have to kind of pump the brakes a little, then you have to mash the gas. That's the time that we're in public education, in a school. It's that sense of urgency because that's one thing our superintendent, Dr. Davis, when we talk about I lead, we have to have that sense of urgency, lead, by example and all those things. But
the
again,
warm demander, that Tyrone
correct,
talks about. Be the
correct.
warm demander. Yeah, yeah,
And so when those things happen, you have to figure out, but you have to listen to kids because honestly, they'll tell their story. They'll say, "Mr. Franklin,
mhm,
well, I went to my aunt's house and my mom and dad had to work because, schools were closed." And so kids were not just, they were in a different environment when we went virtual. And I recall one part, kids were in Indianapolis, but
yeah,
like you said earlier, that's a small moment. You know what? That child can write about
yeah,
because they're going to make that connection to that point, to reference that point in time. All
yeah.
we got to do is get them to put it on paper.
I want to go back to what you said about urgency. And I think this is so tricky because on the one hand, we definitely don't want our teachers and ourselves to kind of approach this year, kind of, this is a remedial year and the kids are behind. And we got to do, fix them up. On the other hand, if we do think about second graders, for example, some of our second graders have never had an uninterrupted school year. Kids have had a chaotic and fragmented education. And so it's an interesting time. And I think what I'm suggesting to people is that we need what you're saying, that urgency. And then what we have to think is, how do we create the conditions where learning is going to happen? Like, what can we put in place where kids are going to just learn and learn and learn? And I think that's almost the opposite of a lot of how remedial education goes. Because if the message is you're behind, you messed up, you got to do this drill, it's boring, but you got to do it, we know that doesn't actually accelerate their learning. So we've got to think about, how do we create the conditions where kids feel welcome, to use Zaretta Hammond's beautiful phrase, where kids feel so welcome and safe, and where school's a place of joy and of trust, and where there's a feeling like in a classroom that we're all taking care of each other's learning. Like, that it's not just individual, I got to plow ahead, but we're together in this, building this like learning place in the classroom.
It's so important, as I stress to teachers, routines, procedures, we all take those things for granted, car ride line, taking kids on a school field trip, because like you said, some of them, hey, they forgot what the building had looked like. For example, when we had map testing here in South Carolina, parents had the option to bring their kids in. Well, you can tell it was a relaxed environment for kids because some kids just walked in, they would pull their cell phones out. I said, guys, we don't have those out right now. He said, well, I have to have this when I'm at. So remember, we're at school now. So the small things they really just forgot about. But going back to something you said, which resonates in my mind, how do we teach teachers, to get kids to start, writing again out of a global pandemic? Because, that's going to be, critical, and I heard you reference teach them those small moments. Then you're going to.
Well, I start with that just because it's the fall. I mean, I think we'll then shift to teach them to, write nonfiction books and teach them to write arguments that change the world and all of that. But yes, people are talking to me about the fact that kids are really used to being at home where their parents did a lot of it for them.
Yeah.
So they wanted to spell a word and mom was right there and she'd tell them how to spell the word. And, I once, we made about 150 videos for parents last year. And I met with the principals ahead of time. I met with a couple hundred principals. I said, what do you want us to say to the parents? Like what would be the messages you want us to give the parents? And there was one message the principals had above all, which was stop doing the work for them.
Right.
Kids need to do the work. So the video I made, I happened to tell a story. It was a true story. My sons came and for my birthday, this is kind of rude, but they gave me weights so I could begin doing training. Okay. And these little things. And by the way, they look like dog bones. They're like nothing. But when you're lifting them the 50th time, they're not so light. They're just little things, but 50 of these, anyhow, in my little video to the parents, I said, my sons were giving me a gift, which was the opportunity for me to work, for me to do the work. So I build my muscles. Yeah. And if my big strapping 30-year-old son had said, Mom, let me help you, and he had come in and did the weights for me, that would not have been helpful. I have to lift the weights. And I sort of said to them, the kids need to lift the weights. And I do think that, now when we're coming back to school, that part of what we need to do is to create classrooms where kids are working hard. And
Absolutely.
they're doing the work on their own. They're working with, now some kids during the pandemic work with more independence than ever.
Correct.
And some was the opposite.
And then, that goes into something else I have to think about, but we're going to have those kids and it'd be the Stacey Frank. What if they don't write? What do we do then? They don't put much down on paper. How do we build on that? What if they just don't write? Because we're going to experience some of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, the first year teachers who were with me day before yesterday were asking about that. And so one of the things I said is that the first thing you have to remember is that if a kid writes 3 lines on Monday, your goal is not to get them to write like a 5th grader on Tuesday. Your goal is to get them to write half a page. So I think part of it is for us to make sure that we adjust our goals so we're marching right ahead of the kids. And we're like, you're doing three lines. You know what? Write fast and furious. Go, go, go. Let's get to the half up a page. You did it. Now we're going to work towards getting a whole page. And, there's all this a lot of teachers are just like, say to the kids, how many of you had half a page? Thumbs up. Yes, you go. When you turn over the page, slap that page, slap it down so I can hear it and celebrate it. We basically have to be all out celebrating kids writing what we call fast and furious. And so I think that's a big part of it. I think making sure the kids are telling their stories aloud before they write them. And they tell them, one time, now tell it again. And this time bring out more details. Now tell it again this time, make the characters talk, add in the exact words that they said. Tell it again this time, make it real juicy. Go to the best part and make it more juicy. As kids tell that same story to a partner 3, 4, 5 times, they're already revising. The story gets so much richer, so much better, and then like, oh my gosh, the stories you're writing, or telling, these need to be on the page.
And that was one thing I was going to think about, because again, I remember when I started off the classroom teacher, getting them to put just more details in there. And I think you thought about that because again, all that's part of the revision, the extension of writing. And like I said, I often recall when we did the work that summer, one of my teachers, and this is a personal story, and I did not expect that this was going to come out during this time because you learn more when you engage in the work with your staff. And I'm pretty sure it was Jonathan because he was with 3 through 5. They had all, did their publishing and we did some writing. So it was time to share. We had the celebration on that Thursday.
Yeah.
And one of my teachers actually got up and she shared a personal tragedy, or I would say trauma that happened into her life. And I always remember that time. She stood up, she came into to the front. We're in the media center. I sat off to the side. And she began to read her story. And I actually, sat there and I read portions of the story today where she started to tell how trauma happened in her life. And she started off saying, she said, I've never ever shared this publicly before. And I started looking around. I'm like, what is about to come out? And she just kind of opened up and started to share how this traumatic event, due to confidentiality, I won't say her name or anything, but again, how does the event change her life? But she talked about all the different details and she put all of her thoughts down on paper. And she said, I said, you're going to share that with kids? She said, yeah, I'll kind of modify it some, but I wanted to give them, it was a true exemplar, and everyone stood up. And we looked at her totally different by just wrapping our arms around her. It made me as a principal think more, but again, it was through writing. If we did not have that summer institute, and on that last Thursday, we were able to share, I would have never known that. So I do know as I built relationship with my teacher now, because this is year 6 for me at Keene Elementary, I know now if she's not feeling it a certain way, I kind of know. And so I'll send him, I say, hey, is everything okay? But again, she's very detail oriented and, I kind of know all the rhyme and reason, but a lot came out through her writing. Like I said, that's why I always used to try to teach my kids when I taught in the classroom to give those details, because again, it says so much about, kids, even as when kids read stories, when you do the read alouds with them, and you say, hey guys, what is this character doing? What's the setting look like? You have to paint that. And it's always good to go back and ask a question within your writing and your work. Because I've noticed that does happen, in the different pieces when it comes to, when you're writing, which is, I would say very, very powerful, very powerful.
So many things that you're saying are just so powerful. I want to go back to that story, at the moment when that teacher stood and shared that, and all of you were listening like that. And I just think, you were saying it's the power of writing. It is the power of writing, but it's also the power of listening. And it's the way that you listened and your staff listened. And it can change you, can't it? Like your whole community is forever different because of that moment. And those moments are happening in schools across this world, and they're changing schools. It's like melting our hearts, it's opening us up. It's all that stuff that Brene Brown talks about how we guard against vulnerability. We armor ourselves up so we're not vulnerable. And yet vulnerability is the cradle of all that we most long for in life. Like that moment it's what you want for your community. And it just allows you to take risks together. It allows you to, as teachers, to try new stuff together. It allows you to be brave together because you've heard each other's stories, each other, you love each other. And that's so huge. You were also talking about the part about reading, writing connections. And I do think that people don't understand that. Well, I don't think people understand that teaching writing is, first of all, teaching social and emotional education.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like you don't have to have a little social and emotional time for 15 minutes at the beginning of the day. You teach writing well and you teach reading well. And you're really teaching people to use literacy to figure out how to live our lives and how to be community with each other. And I'm not against having time for social and emotional education. I just think when you do reading and writing well, it is that, in a really beautiful way. But also what you were saying about reading, writing connections, just to realize that everything you talk about in reading, when you talk about like, what is this character's traits?
Mhm.
Well, when you tell your own story of, you and your dad, what are your traits? What are his traits? And how do they come out? How is your relationship with your dad different when you're at home and when you're on the baseball field? How's the setting change your relationship? Those are the same things they're talking about literature. How does the setting affect the plot line of this story? But to understand all of that can be brought into talking about texts as well. And we've just been talking narrative, you and I, not talking about nonfiction and not talking about opinion and argument, but the same thing like argument, just to understand that, we need to give evidence when we have an argument. We can't just say our opinion, that we need to like back it up with evidence. And then we need to be able to think about what are the counter opinions, the oppositional opinions, and how can I talk back to them or take them into account, all of that.
Even with our district in Richland too, our superintendent, we've becoming an avid district, and which is huge because again, you talk about argumentative, you can go into a classroom and it's good to hear kids have a healthy debate about a topic, and no matter what, of course, in public education, it's so much topics can be controversial now, but again, if it's a good topic that's debatable, kids can go back because whatever their experiences may be, they can actually go back and take a stance and then you write about it. I had a principal always told me that pendulum just kind of swings right back around. And I would say that's kind of where we were because again, I remember when I started in December of '96 teaching, in South Carolina, I think it was the Palmetto Achievement Test, and we taught kids the 3-paragraph format. You open with a question and all the different pieces. But again, I always go back how powerful the opening is just to get capture the listeners' attention. It's huge. But again, kids can take a stance, because again, you got, like you said, the informational writing, but again, the argumentative piece, and a lot of them, they can, I think, perform or conflict real well. Again, just getting them to put it on paper in an appropriate way, again, because even in the midst of all the technology, and one thing I try to remind my kids of here at Killian, we can't talk like how we text on the cell phone. And that's one piece we try to get kids to understand, put your full thought on the paper. Let the reader know, let the person know what you're saying, what the meaning of what you're trying to say.
Yeah. I think when kids write argument, one of the things that happens is they can see that their writing can change the world. So there are so many stories of kids, writing petitions to the superintendent or writing to the dog shelter and, persuasive letters to the dog shelter or writing about bullying on the playground and addressing some of those issues, or, so many instances where kids are saying, we need to work together to make this world a better place. And I think, argument really teaches kids that your voice is an instrument for change and for reform. And you began today by talking about this school. I want everybody to realize that this is about change, for kids as well. This is about change. We're coming back together. How do we want to make school be better than it ever used to be? How can we do that? I think that in too many of our schools, some kids felt unseen before. And those are the kids who slipped away during the pandemic and we almost didn't see them. And I think we need to really make sure that the whole class is involved in making sure everybody feels welcome and everybody feels seen and all languages are respected, that all lives are respected. So I think opinion writing can help to do that.
Absolutely, totally, agree with, those sentiments you shared. Had a kid, after we had completed, I think it was 1 year of the units of study, and something the kids, it was a 5th grade students. It's Mr. Franklin, we want to write you, I think my reading coach had just left from down there, why we can't, it was something about a school issue. I said, well, if you want to, if y'all writing about an opinion about something, I said, write me a letter.
Yeah.
Well, you know what happened? they wrote me a letter about, I think it was something about either the cafeteria or
Yeah.
why recess had to be the way it is, and this is
Yeah.
the way they would want to see it because it sparked an interest. I said, and
Yeah.
honestly, when I went down and actually to begin to go in the classroom and see what the kids were writing, I think it was, was phenomenal. At the same time, during all this in our journey, I'll be public to say, our achievement scores at that time when I think I became principal was like 33% in math and 31% and it was ELA, and honestly, that philosophy takes 3 to 5 years to see change. Well, honestly, I saw it in the third year where I was sitting, and it's again a story. I remember where I was when I got the test scores. I was at summer leadership on Myrtle Beach, and all of a sudden I saw 50 percentile. I looked, I said, is that literacy or math? And I went, I said, it's math. And I looked at literacy, I think we were 41%. So we had, over time, our SMART goals, because I always told the staff, I said in 5, percentage in increments, we set SMART goals for the school in math, literacy, science, and social studies. Well, honestly, we were just on the right on pathway on student achievement. And then, of course, that pandemic came and, I was like, well, maybe we'll still test and we'll still test. And all of a sudden, things started to shut down. I said, well, and then, I really wanted the kids to test that year because I knew we were going to have a great year. We were growing. And then now this year, and I'll tell you, going back to our conversation, is going to be like, okay, where do I start? But again, the great time to start, we got to start through, writing, so and I just want to get your perspective on this. What instructional strategies, because I'm always willing to learn. What can I, share with my teachers, to give them more instructional strategies? Because one, come out of the pandemic and they go, so Mr. Franklin, no, we just don't have time. And I want to be able to make sure that I have all the tools in my tool belt for them.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Let me just tell you a few of the newer things that we've been doing in writing. I'd say one big part of it is that our thinking about small group work has changed. So if you just right now picture that you go in a classroom and you see a teacher leading a small group, okay, and you're just going to watch for 5 minutes. One of the things I want you to think about is who's doing the most work. Because what we have found is that fairly often teachers are leading small groups where they're doing most of the work. They're doing most of the talking, they're doing most of the work. And I think it's really important to turn that around so that the kids are doing most of the work in small group. And there's 2 reasons for that. One is because we learn by our own work, just like we were talking about before. Mm-hmm. But the other is that if small groups are an awful lot of work, then teachers don't really do them very often. They don't get time. They don't get to that. They don't prepare the night before. They don't. So I think figuring out how to do small groups where the design is the kids are doing most of the work. And for us, we have a kind of little, how we have for our mini lessons or our conferences, we have little architecture. We talk about the architecture of a mini lesson, the architecture of a conference. We have an architecture of small group work, which is new for us, which is that there's a rally, and that's like 30 seconds of the teacher talking. And then there's try it 1 and then try it 2. Okay, so it could be that the rally is, I'm thinking about narrative because we've been talking about narrative. Maybe the rally is that it's so important in your stories to make sure you already know that it's important to make sure that your characters are talking. The people you bring out their voices, their dialogue. But sometimes you get confused who's talking. And it's really important to be able to put in, tags as to who's talking. Said dad, said mom, said dad, and you can even go more. Dad answered, mom whispered, So adding those are important. Okay, so that's like the 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. That way people can really take your writing and they could even act it out. They can read it aloud with expression. Then comes a try it, where you get the kids to do this in an easy way, and then they do it in a harder way. So the easy way might be that we say, my neighbor Gertie, we've given her a name, Gertie. My neighbor Gertie brought her writing over last night, and she wanted my help with it. So it's just 3 lines long, but could I give each of you partners a copy of it? And will you just see if you can help Gertie to add in who's talking? So they both work on this little piece that you've developed that, is very easy for them to work on. And then you just say, oh my God, you guys are so good at this. How about bring out your own writing and partner two, help partner one, to revise your own writing to make sure it's clear who's talking. So what you see there is there's a little rally, and then there's one activity and then another. Let's go to a different one. It might be, for example, you're talking about kids are writing information writing, and you might just say, will you grab some stuff around you, your cell phone, your book, just grab some stuff around you. And now you have a pile of stuff. Will you categorize that stuff in some way? It could be by color, it could be by shape, it could be by what it's good for. Just do it. Work with your partner and do it. So the kids might categorize it by, dark color, light color, or circle, square. Okay. And then you say, you know what? Categorize it in a different way. Okay. Metal versus paper. They come up with different ways. Now categorize it in a different way. Right. Now, will you look over your writing and realize that you've written fact about penguins or tigers or whatever? Will you and your partner try to categorize your writing in one way? See if you can categorize it in a different way, and then decide what category works best for you. So these are small groups which are really getting the kids to work in partners. Okay. And then the teacher can kind of listen into these partners talk, If it's in partners, you don't have to interview them to say, what are you thinking? Because you can kind of eavesdrop, and you just kind of coach into it, like you're doing it, keep going, or give some examples, be more specific, and then you move on to the next one. So that's an example of one of the things that we're doing that I think is going to be really important in the pandemic, because I think everybody needs to do more small group work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do believe that, because again, the teachers are the ones with all the tools in their tool belts to get the kids to do, what they need. And then are you, with the writing units of study, are you guys still virtual? Or are you going to kind of, still do some face-to-face? How's that going to look moving forward?
In terms of our staff development?
Yes, or staff development, correct. Your staff development.
Every day we're wondering about it, every single day. So we are hoping to be in person this year. I think everybody's hoping to be in person. So we're set to be in person. But today I heard my fourth staff developer got COVID. And this particular staff developer yesterday had lunch with the superintendent in the district. And she's like, did I give him COVID? She was doing an institute in that district. She probably got COVID from that. And she was wearing masks. Everybody was wearing masks. But what does this mean? What does it mean? And if, for those of us who are moving from one building to another, how do we do the most good and how do we do the least harm? We're still trying to figure that out. We so want to be in person. I think the little conversations that you can have in person, like before you get started, in the washroom or, walking down the hall and everything. I so missed those when it was Zoom, when there's, it's harder to have the small talk that's not small at all. That's everything.
I do, agree. Like I said, it's just great to see when you pull up in front of the building, you see kids, you see cars, you see kids walking in, definitely, because again, here, we strongly encourage, to wear, mask. And, I'm very excited and proud of all my parents at my school, even down to the staff. I mean, they, very resilient, they wear their mask every day. I actually went out and purchased some little, it's like a intercom for the teachers where when they have the mic on, it helps project their voice when they have a mask on. I was walking down the classroom and I heard a voice. And I'm like, who's that talking? And I walked into the second grade room, and this teacher, she was there, and she was like, I said, where did you purchase that? She's off Amazon. So I took a picture of it and I sent it out, talked to my team leader. I said, do you guys, would it benefit? She said, yeah, when we're doing some of the work, the kids can hear us. So went out and purchased 48 of them. And, and
Stacy, what's the, tell us what it is.
What I'll do, I need to, honestly, I'll have to take a picture of it, but it's just no bigger than a cell phone. And it has a little microphone. And honestly, I have one, and I can send a actually picture of it, because I have some in my in the teacher closet. I'm in there, but my PTO president had said, Stacy, did you share that with people? I said, no, I didn't think it was something that I should have shared. I would say, hey, I'm very, humble. I mean, I'm just this calm guy, and I said, this person's with the teachers. That's great. Other schools need to know. So honestly, I'll actually share it with you. I
Yeah,
mean, because
yeah.
I just didn't think it'd be such a hit. Honestly, the related arts teachers and the art teacher, I'm like, wow, I didn't know if something would, but honestly, it
This
helped.
may be the most important thing that was said today. Because being able to help teachers get their voice out
Yeah,
is
and
such a
honestly,
gift.
and that's what helped. I mean, so you see the teachers. I mean, they'll actually have it on, and it's like, thank you, Mr. Franklin. I'm like, okay, and so some folks may not need them, but some who voices project more. It's like, well, I'll still use it. So those are things that we learned coming out of the pandemic. Hey, because again, with the little kindergartners, you can you just won't hear them coming back into the building. If you're a first grader that were, that you would have been a pre-K kid that so
Yeah.
all the different pieces.
The other thing that we're learning is just what you are just doing now, which is, you listen to one teacher who does something smart, and then you do it for 48 teachers, and then you share it with me, and then we share it, and this is what happened in the pandemic when we just remember we did not know what we were doing.
You got that right.
Right? All of a sudden schools closed down and we're like, you're supposed to continue and teach on the computer. And like the whole of the teaching profession is like, what? I'm supposed to do what?
Mhm.
And just think what we as a profession pulled off. What we as a school pulled off, as all of these schools. And I think what it is that we realized we can't do it alone. We need this one teacher who comes up with it. I mean, I remember on the Facebook page, we got these 80,000 beautiful teachers on our Facebook page, and one teacher taught them how to turn your cell phone into a document camera, and she did a little YouTube video of it, and it's up on the Facebook page, and it's going viral. Because everybody's, how do I create a document camera to be able to teach kids? When I'm teaching remotely. So I just think we have learned how to be generous in our learning, and we've learned how to not know. We've learned how to say, I need help, and we've learned how to be there for each other and to forgive each other. And also, by the way, we've learned to learn from these surprising people. Like in my organization, it was some of like the 26-year-olds who are teaching, everybody else because they knew more about technology.
Yeah, correct.
And we're like, they become our guru. And that's a beautiful thing when it's not the same people always as your leaders, and we're all learners and we're all leaders in this world, wild world we're in.
All the time. I mean, that, like I said, I had to learn as a principal to build others' capacity, during the pandemic, and I was like, hey, tell me this about, Google Meet. Does it do? And they were like, well, no, it can do this. And then you got the enhancements and the add-ons. And so, because Richmond too, we're a Google district. That's what we use. All the kids have Chromebooks, and they have to learn how to navigate. Putting things in, as far as their pathways or ingenuity. And again, it's still all that goes back to again, like I told the teachers, I said, guys, the technology is good, but we got kids in the school. Allow them. I said, give them a piece of paper and pencil. I say, because again. Yeah. That's unique. And it's just starting off with just, if it's an apple on a desk or object in a room, let's write about it.
Yeah.
Think about it. Let's just write about it. I mean, and I'll end with this. I mean, like I said, if it can just be, like you said, I kept hearing you say it's small moments. Hey, if it's an apple or something, let's just write about it. And like you said, 2 sentences, and we build on that, and we build on this, and we just keep building. And all of a sudden, those kids are going to be like, wow, look what we've done. And then, with the little kids, they like to illustrate and draw. And you can, it's just so much. I think we can capitalize so much coming out of a pandemic through writing. It's going to be huge. And again, because I'm one, I do a balance with technology, but now I think we have to kind of say, okay, let's slow down with technology. Let's get out the old pencil and some, whether it's the spiral composition book, because that's the part that I really loved when Jonathan and Arlene came here. They said, Mr. Franklin, are you going to buy the Marvel books? I said, I'm going to purchase all those things because I saw a vision and it started something. So we actually in our K-2 classes now, we get the composition books with the part where you can illustrate across the top and the kids get the to write, because when I started as a classroom teacher, we had that, it was the old brown paper. I used to call it
Yeah.
the cornbread paper, but
Yeah.
no more. I mean, let's get the composition book. So that's been a standard now.
What did you stop? Like, let's not talk work for a minute, just personally. Did you like, for me, I learned some new things that have nothing to do with work, but then again, they do have to do with work. Like my kids gave me a bike and I'm like, a bike at my age, and I got on that thing. I'm like, I haven't been on a bike since, since I was like, I don't know, 9 or something, but I'm biking along, singing a song. And I'm like, you know what? I'm literally like connecting to my roots in a way. And I'm realizing I can still do this fun thing that I thought I was too old for. Are there things that in your life that you've done that are just different because of the pandemic?
Yeah, honestly, when I was home, I actually opened the front door. And when I opened
Open the front door.
I opened the front door of the house. I mean,
Yeah.
I opened my door and I was able to look outside. And I was just amazed to see the people around me that would be out during a certain time of day. And I guess those were the people who always worked from home. But because Stacy, a school principal, I commute to work like 50 miles
Right.
one way. I do 100 miles a day. And so all of a sudden, when I was home, I said, oh, this person may work from home and this person worked from home. And I'm like, man, there's a lot of people.
There's a
like
neighborhood here.
it's a neighborhood here, but I miss some of it because you know what?
Yeah.
I'm an elementary principal. So when I leave home, I'm stuck on those routines. But I started to revisit. I started riding my bicycle again.
Did you really?
Honestly, I'm gonna be honest with you. I started riding my bicycle again just to see and ride the neighborhood. And I saw some people, and I'm like, man, I said, this is what it's like. You just kind of notice everything.
Yeah.
Because the world had really just slowed down because we're always in that fast-paced world, and I'm like, wow, we learned how to do things different.
It's just interesting to think if we go to those personal things like that. I mean, I also formed a cooking club, and I'm like the worst cook that you could ever imagine. And I just did it with some colleagues from my school, and we would just really follow a recipe. I mean, we weren't doing anything fancy, but it was really fun. And I think I learned something about just getting out of I think at this age, I only do the things I'm good at. And I don't that often do things that I'm really a novice at. And it was good for me to just be a beginner in things.
Awesome. I mean, we talk about, that self-care, and that's something that I always try to encourage with my teachers, practice that self-care. And I think that was so huge. I said, and I would always say, because they always tell me, you always work, and I would stay out late on a Friday, and I said, you know what? I'm going to go home and just stop. Because as a principal, it's almost like you always on go. I mean, your brain, you wake up sometimes 3:30 in the morning. I remember when my assistant superintendent, he hired me, he said, Stacy Franklin, you're going to find yourself waking up. And I always told his name was Mr. Price at the time. He said, you're going to find yourself waking up at different times and it's going to start thinking about stuff. Well, you know what? I started to turn things off because Dr. Davis, our superintendent, he role modeled that. My assistant superintendent at the time, Dr. James Anchili, she role modeled that. She said, practice self-care this weekend, Stacy Franklin. So I said, she said, are you working basketball? Because also I'm a basketball official. And also, so I said, you know what? I'm not going to do no basketball. Just stop. And I spent, enjoyed family time more. My wife, Monica, was working from home and Peyton was at home and we were in the house together. And I'm like, man, I said, honestly, it was good, and I'm sitting there trying to listen to his teacher, teach the school principal. And I'm like, no, Peyton got it. So, but you learn a lot, doing the pen. But like I said, the most powerful thing, opening that front door and seeing what's around you.
Yeah. Gorgeous. Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad we've had this time to talk.
Honestly, it was a pleasure. I always, hear your name. I read a lot, but it was honestly a great conversation. It's almost seemed like I know you.
I know, no,
and
yeah,
so,
absolutely. We should get together, ride bikes. Next time you come to New York, we'll rent bikes and, go along the High Line.
absolutely. Well,
Well, thank you
again,
so
thank
much.
you. And I appreciate you for all the work that you've done and keep doing what you do for public
I
education.
appreciate you too. Yeah,
Thank you.
so much.